there's a quiet battle many people carry, one that isn't always visible, but deeply felt. It shows up as fear, as anxiety, as a sense that something unseen is working against you. Sometimes we give it names like negativity, spiritual attack, or even witchcraft. But beneath all of that, there is a human experience of vulnerability, of pain, of longing for safety and protection. When we turn to Psalm 59, we're not just reading ancient words, we're stepping into a raw, honest cry for deliverance. It speaks to that part of us that feels hunted, overwhelmed, and desperate for refuge. Yet within that cry is also a profound truth: the power of faith to restore inner safety, to reclaim authority over fear, and to break the hold of anything that seeks to diminish our spirit. This is not just about destruction of external. Recognizing fear versus reality is one of the most crucial inner shifts a person can make, especially when dealing with beliefs around unseen harms, spiritual attacks, or what is often labeled as witchcraft. Fear by its nature is persuasive. It doesn't need evidence to feel real, it only needs uncertainty, vulnerability, and a mind that is searching for explanations. When someone feels overwhelmed, targeted, or spiritually unsafe, the mind begins to construct narratives to make sense of that discomfort. These narratives can quickly take on a life of their own, reinforcing a sense of danger even when the source is not clearly grounded in objective reality. From a psychological perspective, fear often emerges from past experiences where safety was compromised. It may not always be remembered consciously, but the body holds onto those imprints. When something in the present moment triggers that old sense of threat, the reaction can feel immediate and intense. The heart races, the thoughts spiral, and suddenly the person feels as though something external is attacking them. In that state, it becomes very easy to attribute the feeling to something like witchcraft or unseen forces because the emotional intensity demands an explanation. However, reality operates differently from fear. Reality is grounded, observable, and not driven by the urgency of emotion alone. Fear exaggerates, distorts, and amplifies. It takes a small uncertainty and turns it into a looming threat. It narrows perception so that everything begins to look like confirmation of danger. A simple coincidence can feel like a sign. A moment of bad luck can feel like a targeted act. The more attention fear receives, the more convincing it becomes, creating a cycle where belief strengthens the emotional response, and the emotional response strengthens the belief. Recognizing this difference requires a level of awareness that is both gentle and honest. It is not about dismissing what someone feels, because the fear itself is real in the body and mind. The anxiety, the tension, the unease, these are genuine experiences. But the interpretation of those feelings is where the distortion can occur. When a person begins to observe their thoughts instead of immediately believing them, a space is created. In that space, questions can arise. Is this fear based on something I can clearly see and verify, or is it rooted in uncertainty and assumption? Is my mind trying to protect me, or is it repeating an old pattern that no longer serves me? Faith, in this context, becomes a stabilizing force, not as a tool to validate fear, but as a grounding presence that reconnects the individual to a deeper sense of safety. Psalm 59 reflects a cry for protection, but it also carries an underlying trust that there is a Arabic ka'af, Arabic kwa, Arabic tamarbuta, greater than any perceived threat. This trust can help shift the focus away from externalizing fear and towards strengthening inner security. When someone feels anchored in their faith, the urgency of fear begins to soften. The need to assign blame or identify an external attacker becomes less dominant, because there is a growing confidence in being protected and held. It is also important to understand how the mind seeks control. Labeling something as witchcraft or an attack can sometimes give a sense of structure to chaos. It provides a reason, even if that reason increases fear. Letting go of that narrative can feel unsettling at first because it removes the illusion of knowing. But in that space, there is an opportunity to develop a more grounded and resilient way of relating to uncertainty. One that does not rely on fear-driven explanations. The psychology of spiritual attack is deeply tied to how the human mind processes stress, uncertainty, and emotional pain. When people feel overwhelmed or unable to explain what they are going through, the mind naturally looks for meaning. It does not tolerate randomness very well, especially when the experience feels intense or threatening. So it begins to construct a narrative, often drawing from cultural, religious, or personal beliefs. In some cases, that narrative becomes the idea that there is an external force deliberately causing harm, something unseen, intentional, and targeted. This doesn't come from weakness, it comes from the mind's attempt to create order out of chaos. When emotions rise beyond what feels manageable, the brain shifts into a protective mode. It scans for danger, even where there may be none, because its primary goal is survival. This is the same mechanism that once helped human beings detect real threats in their environment. But in a modern psychological and emotional context, that same mechanism can misfire. Instead of identifying physical danger, it interprets internal discomfort as evidence of external attack. What makes the idea of spiritual attack so powerful is that it blends emotion with belief. If someone already holds a framework that includes unseen forces, whether through religion, culture, or upbringing, then the mind has ready-made explanations to attach to those feelings. A sudden wave of anxiety, a series of unfortunate events, or even physical sensations like fatigue or tension can be interpreted as signs of something spiritual working against them. The more this interpretation is reinforced, the more real it feels. There is also an important emotional layer to this. Feeling targeted can create a sense of significance in the midst of suffering. It can transform random pain into something that feels purposeful, even if that purpose is negative. This can be strangely comforting because it answers the question, why is this happening to me? Even if the answer increases fear. It is often easier for the mind to believe that something is being done to it than to sit with the uncertainty of not knowing or the vulnerability of recognizing internal struggles. Another aspect is the role of projection. Human beings sometimes externalize what they cannot yet face within themselves. Unprocessed emotions such as anger, grief, shame, or fear can feel overwhelming. Instead of being recognized as internal experiences, they are projected outward and perceived as coming from outside. This is not a conscious choice, it is a psychological defense. It allows the person to distance themselves from the intensity of their inner world. However, when this projection takes the form of a spiritual attack, it can reinforce a cycle of fear and helplessness. The body also plays a crucial role. When someone believes they are under attack, the nervous system responds accordingly. Stress hormones increase, the body remains in a heightened state of alertness, and physical symptoms can appear. These sensations then serve as further evidence that something is wrong, strengthening the belief. It becomes a feedback loop where the mind and body continuously confirm each other's fears. Faith, when approached with awareness, can interrupt this cycle. Instead of feeding the fear of attack, it can offer a sense of grounding and connection. It can shift the focus from something is being done to me to I am supported and protected. This doesn't mean denying the experience, but rather relating to it differently. It introduces the possibility that what feels like an attack may actually be an internal signal, a call for attention, healing, or understanding. Understanding the psychology behind spiritual attack does not invalidate a person's experience, it deepens it. It opens the door to exploring what is happening beneath the surface, rather than immediately accepting the most frightening explanation. In that exploration, there is an opportunity to reclaim a sense of agency, to recognize how the mind shapes perception, and to respond with awareness instead of automatic fear. Reclaiming inner safety through faith is not about denying what you feel, it's about transforming your relationship with those feelings. When a person feels threatened, whether emotionally, mentally, or spiritually, the immediate instinct is to look outward for protection. There is a sense that safety must come from eliminating whatever danger is perceived to exist. But inner safety doesn't begin outside, it begins within the nervous system, within the way the mind interprets experience, and within the connection a person has to something greater than themselves. Many people grow up without a consistent sense of emotional safety. This doesn't always come from obvious trauma, sometimes it comes from subtle environments where fear, unpredictability, or pressure were present. Over time, the body learns to stay alert, to anticipate danger even in relatively calm situations. When this internal state becomes the baseline, it doesn't take much to trigger it. A stressful event, a negative thought, or even a quiet moment of uncertainty can activate that same sense of unease. In those moments, the mind often searches for something external to explain the feeling. Because it is easier to locate danger outside than to recognize that the body itself has learned to feel unsafe. Faith offers a different pathway. It introduces the idea that safety is not solely dependent on circumstances, but on connection. When someone turns to faith, whether through prayer, reflection, or simply remembering a higher presence, they are not just asking for protection. They are shifting their internal state. They are moving from isolation to connection, from fear to trust. This shift has a real psychological impact. The body begins to settle, the breath deepens, and the mind becomes less reactive. Psalm 59 reflects this movement. It begins with a cry for deliverance, an expression of distress and vulnerability. But within that expression, there is also an acknowledgement of a Arabic kaf, Arabic kwa, Arabic timur buta, greater than the threat. This acknowledgement is what creates space for inner safety. It reminds the individual that they are not alone, that they are not entirely at the mercy of what they fear. Even if the external situation remains uncertain, the internal experience begins to change. Reclaiming inner safety also involves recognizing the difference between control and trust. Fear seeks control, it wants certainty, guarantees, and clear answers. It pushes the mind to analyze, to predict, and to defend against every possible threat. But this constant state of vigilance keeps the body in tension. Trust, on the other hand, allows for uncertainty. It does not mean passivity, it means accepting that not everything can be controlled while still feeling secure. Faith supports this kind of trust by offering a sense of stability that is not dependent on having all the answers. There is also an element of self-awareness in this process. When a person begins to notice how quickly their mind moves toward fear-based interpretations, they can pause. That pause is powerful. It interrupts the automatic reaction and creates an opportunity to choose a different response. Instead of immediately assuming that something external is causing harm, we should consider the possibility that the problem lies within ourselves. They can turn inward and ask what they are feeling, what their body is experiencing, and what they truly need in that moment. Often what emerges is not evidence of attack, but a need for reassurance, grounding, or rest. Faith can meet that need in a way that is both emotional and spiritual. It can provide comfort without requiring proof, stability without requiring control. Over time, as this connection is strengthened, the sense of inner safety becomes more consistent. The mind becomes less inclined to jump to fearful conclusions, and the body becomes less reactive to perceived threats. What once felt overwhelming begins to feel manageable, not because the world has changed, but because the internal foundation has become stronger. Breaking the illusion of powerlessness begins with understanding how convincing that illusion can be. When a person feels overwhelmed by fear, by repeated difficulties, or by the belief that something unseen is working against them, it can genuinely seem as though control has been taken away. The experience is not imagined, the emotional weight is real. But the conclusion, that one is completely powerless, is often a distortion shaped by the intensity of that experience rather than an accurate reflection of reality. Powerlessness often develops gradually. It can come from situations where efforts didn't lead to the desired outcome, where trust was broken, or where challenges seemed relentless. Over time, the mind starts to form a narrative. No matter what I do, it won't change anything. This belief becomes a filter through which every new experience is interpreted. Even small setbacks begin to reinforce it, while moments of strength or success are minimized or overlooked. The person doesn't consciously choose this pattern, it becomes automatic, almost like a habit of perception. When this internal state combines with spiritual interpretations such as the idea of witchcraft or external attacks, the sense of powerlessness can deepen. It shifts from "I can't change my situation" to "something is controlling my situation." That shift is significant because it removes agency. If something external is believed to hold power over one's life, then any attempt to regain control can feel pointless. This is where the illusion becomes most restrictive, because it limits not only action but also the belief that action could matter. From a psychological perspective, this is closely related to what is known as learned helplessness. When a person repeatedly encounters situations where they feel they have no control, the mind adapts by lowering expectations and reducing effort. It's a way of conserving energy, of protecting against further disappointment. But in doing so, it also prevents the recognition of moments where influence or choice is still possible. The person becomes disconnected from their own capacity to respond, adapt, and influence their environment. Breaking this illusion does not require denying the difficulty of one's experiences. It begins with gently questioning the conclusions drawn from them. Instead of accepting "I have no power," the individual can begin to explore where power still exists, even in small ways. This might be in how they respond to a situation, how they interpret an event, or how they care for themselves in moments of distress. These may seem like minor shifts, but they are significant because they reintroduce the idea of agency. Faith can play a crucial role in this process, but not in a way that reinforces passivity. True faith does not strip a person of their responsibility or their capacity to act, it supports it. It offers a sense of partnership rather than replacement. Instead of waiting for something external to fix everything, faith encourages the individual to engage with their own strength while trusting that they are supported. This balance can help restore a sense of influence without creating pressure for complete control. There is also an important shift that happens when a person moves from fear-based thinking to awareness-based thinking. Fear narrows perception, making it difficult to see options or alternatives. Awareness, on the other hand, expands it. It allows the person to notice patterns, to recognize triggers, and to understand how their thoughts and emotions are interacting. With that understanding, the sense of being controlled begins to loosen. The individual starts to see that while they may not control everything that happens, they are not entirely at the mercy of it either. Over time, as these small moments of agency are recognized and reinforced, the illusion of powerlessness begins to weaken. It doesn't disappear all at once, but it becomes less convincing. The person starts to feel a subtle shift from being a passive recipient of circumstances to an active participant in their own experience. That shift can change how challenges are approached, how fear is processed, and how meaning is created from difficult situations. The role of awareness in spiritual protection is often misunderstood. Many people think of protection as something external, something that shields them from harm without requiring their participation. But awareness introduces a different dimension. It is not a barrier placed around you, it is a clarity that develops within you. And that clarity changes how you perceive, interpret, and respond to everything that once felt threatening. Awareness begins with observation. It is the ability to notice your thoughts, your emotions, and your bodily sensations without immediately reacting to them. This might sound simple, but for most people it is not a natural habit. The mind tends to move quickly, jumping from one thought to another, often attaching meaning before there is space to question it. When fear arises, it is usually followed by a story and explanation of why that fear exists. Without awareness, that story is accepted as truth. With awareness, it becomes something that can be examined. In the context of spiritual fear, this becomes especially important. When someone feels uneasy, anxious, or disturbed, the mind may quickly label it as an external attack or something supernatural. That interpretation can feel convincing because it aligns with the emotional intensity of the experience. But awareness creates a pause. In that pause, the person can begin to ask different questions. What exactly am I feeling right now? Where is this sensation in my body? What thoughts are accompanying it? These questions shift the focus from reacting to understanding. This process does not dismiss spirituality, it refines it. It allows faith to exist without being driven by fear. When awareness is present, a person is less likely to interpret every discomfort as a sign of danger. Instead, they begin to see that many of their reactions are rooted in internal patterns, habits of thought, and emotion that have developed over time. These patterns can be influenced by past experiences, cultural beliefs, and repeated exposure to certain ideas. Recognizing this does not weaken faith, it strengthens it by removing unnecessary fear from the equation. The body plays a significant role in this as well. Often what is perceived as a spiritual disturbance is actually a physiological response. The nervous system becomes activated, creating sensations like tightness in the chest, rapid heartbeat, or restlessness. Without awareness, these sensations can feel mysterious and alarming. With awareness, they can be understood as part of the body's natural response to stress. This understanding reduces the urgency to assign a threatening meaning to them. Awareness also changes the relationship with thoughts. Instead of being pulled into every thought that arises, a person can begin to observe them as passing events. A thought that says something is wrong or I am under attack can be noticed without being immediately believed. This creates a space where the thought loses some of its power. It is no longer a command that must be followed, but a mental event that can be questioned. Faith, when combined with awareness, becomes more grounded. It is no longer about reacting to fear with more fear, but about responding with clarity and trust. A person can turn to prayer or reflection not as a desperate attempt to escape danger, but as a conscious choice to connect with something greater. This shift changes the quality of that connection. It becomes less about seeking rescue and more about reinforcing a sense of stability and presence. Over time, awareness builds resilience. The mind becomes less reactive, the body becomes less tense, and the interpretations of experience become more balanced. What once felt like constant vulnerability begins to feel like something that can be understood and managed. This does not mean that fear disappears completely, but it no longer dominates. It becomes one part of the experience rather than the defining force behind it. Transforming fear into divine trust is not an instant shift. It is a gradual reorientation of how a person relates to uncertainty, vulnerability, and the unknown. Fear at its core is not the enemy. It is a natural human response designed to protect, to alert, and to prepare. But when fear becomes overwhelming or constant, it begins to lose its original purpose. Instead of guiding, it starts to control. Instead of protecting, it restricts. The transformation begins not by eliminating fear, but by understanding it and changing the role it plays in one's inner life. Fear often arises when there is a perceived lack of control. The mind wants certainty, predictability, and safety. When those are not guaranteed, it fills the gap with worry, imagining worst-case scenarios in an attempt to prepare. In spiritual context, this can take the form of believing that unseen forces are working against you. The fear becomes personalized, intentional, and difficult to challenge because it feels both emotional and spiritual at the same time. This is where the shift toward trust becomes essential. Trust does not mean having all the answers. It means being able to remain steady even when answers are not immediately available. Divine trust, in particular, introduces the idea that there is a wisdom beyond personal understanding. A Arabic kaf, Arabic wa, Arabic tema Buddha that is not only greater but also protective and aware. This perspective does not remove uncertainty, but it changes how uncertainty is experienced. Instead of something threatening, it becomes something that can be held within a larger sense of Arabic hamzata talif, Arabic meme, Arabic noon. The process of transformation begins with awareness of the fear itself. Instead of reacting to it immediately, the person learns to notice it. They begin to see how it arises, what triggers it, and how it influences their thoughts and body. This awareness creates a small but important distance. In that distance, the fear is no longer the entire reality, it becomes one part of the experience. This allows for a different response to emerge. One of the key elements in this shift is surrender, but not in the sense of giving up. It is a release of the need to control everything. Fear is often driven by the belief that if you can just think enough, analyze enough, or prepare enough, you can prevent what you are afraid of. But this constant effort can be exhausting and ultimately ineffective. Surrender in this context is the recognition that some things are beyond personal control, and that holding on to them tightly only increases anxiety. Letting go creates space for trust to develop. Faith supports this process by providing a foundation for that trust. When a person believes that they are guided or protected, it becomes easier to release the constant need to anticipate danger. This does not mean ignoring reality or becoming passive. It means engaging with life from a place of steadiness rather than fear. Decisions are still made, actions are still taken, but they are not driven by panic or urgency. There is also a shift in how challenges are interpreted. Fear tends to view difficulties as threats or punishments. Trust, on the other hand, allows for the possibility that challenges may carry meaning or growth, even if that meaning is not immediately clear. This does not romanticize suffering, but it changes the relationship to it. Instead of something that must be resisted at all costs, it becomes something that can be faced with resilience and patience. Over time, as trust is practiced, it begins to replace the dominance of fear. The mind becomes less reactive, the body becomes more at ease, and the overall sense of stability increases. Fear may still arise, but it no longer dictates every thought or action. It is met with a deeper knowing, a quiet confidence that whatever happens can be faced and navigated with support beyond what is immediately visible.